Welcome, and I can't promise you this is going to be Chris Harris sliding a GTR around a track. I can't even promise you you'll have witty quips like you would get from Clarkson. But what I can promise you is I'm going to give you a down-to-earth, unbiased, honest review of my Nissan GT-R over the last 3 months. It's also starting to rain, so let's get started. So I've done my very best here to try and focus on the bits that you don't hear people talking about with these cars very often. So we all know the interior's a little bit iffy, they're getting on a little bit now, and at this money, it's kind of questionable. We all know the cars make unusual noises, so let's not focus on any of that because there's a million YouTube videos out there. No, instead I want to try and give you guys a real insight and some knowledge that you maybe haven't heard about these cars before. So first up, let's start with the niggles. First up, what have I not enjoyed so much about this car over the last 3 months? Well, the first one I've chosen to talk about is probably the hardest one to explain, but it's happening right now, so I can maybe show you some of it as well. And it's also one of my biggest niggles with the car. Now, it's when we're crawling through traffic, kind of like we are now, through those villages, in a bit of traffic, you notice there's just an inherent kind of laziness, a sloppiness to the car. So let me try and explain that a bit better. We're going along, you maybe prod the throttle, and you don't get the drive that you expect it to give you, and that's because the car has decided at that point it's going to slip the clutch a little bit, or it's going to hang on to second gear, when really the more obvious thing for it to do would have been jump down into first and give you that immediate drive. It doesn't always do that, so you find yourself in traffic sort of preempting what the car's going to do, and maybe you turn down a side street or something like that and the car chooses to jump to a higher gear, which again you maybe wouldn't necessarily predict it to do. So it ends up you're sort of trying to preempt what the car is going to do in that scenario. Now, I've come from a V8 R8 manual, which many of you know, you've seen videos on the channel about, and maybe it's just because of that, it doesn't really come more direct than that car was. So maybe it's something I just need to give a bit of time. But this might seem a weird conclusion to draw, but under 40-50 mile an hour, the R8's the more enjoyable car. Might seem a bit odd, but it just is. You can choose your gear and the immediacy is there. You're not having to preempt what the car's going to do. So the next little gripe I want to talk about is the gearbox. Now, don't get me wrong, when you're on it and you pull that paddle, shifts are absolutely on point. They're rapid, they're up there with the cars even made today. Modern DSG transmissions, I'd say it's just as good and just as quick. However, my gripe with it lies with the brains behind it. So let me explain. We're cruising along, and as the car's doing right now, we're doing 34 miles an hour, and the car has jumped into 6th gear. Now we're at about just over 1,000 RPM. So I think this doesn't help the first point that I made, where the car feels a little bit lethargic, a little bit lazy on pickup. Now that's okay, I understand it's doing it to try and save fuel, keep the noise down, etc. That's all right, but what I would like here is when I put it into R mode for the transmission, I wish it was just a little bit keener to hang on to those gears, let the revs get a little bit higher and help the car feel a little bit keener to move. The third and final niggle I want to talk about here, it feels wrong talking so negatively about a car that I love so much, but we're just about to come on to the good stuff, so that's quite alright. It's the sheer bloody size of the thing. On a typical British B road, it feels gargantuan. Overtaking, you particularly notice that you feel like you're just about in the verge of the opposite hand lane, just trying to clear the car that you're overtaking. Now, on that note as well, How is the interior so small? I think the interior is tighter than any car I've been in of late, despite the car being so big. In terms of interior to exterior size ratio, this must be one of the highest ratios you can get. So how about things I actually like about this car? It can't just be niggles. I went out and bought one, so obviously there's some stuff that I like, and there certainly is. Let me begin by saying I've had quite a lot going on in life lately, as I'm sure many of you have as well. And it's not always positive, of course not, that's life. However, anytime I get in this car, it makes not only that journey more enjoyable, but it makes me just a little bit happier. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to what I'm saying here as well. And that's hard to put a price on. Well, you can. 50 bags in this case. Well, first thing I love about the GTR, probably somewhat predictable from a GTR owner, it's the sheer outright pace of the thing. So this is a Litchfield Stage 3 car. So that consists of different intakes, 4-inch exhaust, and a remap. So original injectors are still in place, original cats are still in there as well. But even then, it's making somewhere in the region 620, 630 brake horsepower, with around about 548 Newton meters of torque. So what does that translate to on the road? Well, I'll be honest with you, probably too much. I mean, it just feels a bit wrong with all the other road lemmings around you at times. You feel a bit like a fighter pilot trying to navigate around learner pilots in Cessnas. It probably doesn't need any more, and I know someone's going to fight me in the comment section on this and say, how can you ever have too much power on a GTR? But honestly, take this a drive on public roads when you're not being an absolute loon, and I doubt you could say it's needing any more. Sufficient, we'll call it. So why is it important that the GTR can offer up that level of performance? Well, from my point of view, it's twofold. One, it's yobbishly good fun. It's a damn quick car and you can have a lot of fun with it. Two, however, and perhaps a wee bit more meaningful, is it allows people like me to experience that level of performance. Now, I can't go and buy a Ferrari with that performance level. I can't buy a Lamborghini with that level of performance, but I can have a GTR with this level of performance. And for that reason, I really do love it and think it's important. Who doesn't love an underdog? Second reason why I love the GTR so bloody much, well, it's a properly dialed in car. A lot of people said to me, did you not consider maybe looking at RS6 and RS7? And on paper, big turbocharged cars, lots of power. Yeah, on paper, pretty similar. But I've driven hundreds of cars over the years and none of them feel like a GTR to drive. There's a very good reason why the GTR still feels as current as it does. No, I mean there's actually physically good reasons for it. We've got the engine at the front and the gearbox at the back for perfect weight distribution. That means the car's having to send the power from the front to the rear, then back to the front via a secondary prop shaft to power the front wheels. And that gearbox is also heavily rear-wheel drive bias to cut down drivetrain loss. Take that, Mr. Quattro Audi. So how do we wrap up this 3-month review then? Well, quite honestly, it's absolutely the best car that I've ever owned. Possibly one of the best cars that I've ever driven. It's communicative, involving, and just downright rapid as well. When you consider what this thing's like as a whole, it's so easy to overlook those little annoyances that I mentioned in this video. If you're interested in seeing a bit more about the car as we inevitably up the power and the road trips that we've got planned, then hit the subscribe button and we'll see you on the next one.